Hello and welcome to the channel Echoes Shadows. Today we'll explore the true story of a young person whose uncontrollable jealousy led them down a dark path, where mere suspicion turns into a true nightmare. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the upcoming stories. Thank you very much.
My name is Clara, and my story is not something I share easily. At 32, I had everything I considered essential: a good job, my own apartment, and Henrique, my boyfriend. He was the kind of man people describe as perfect, attentive, affectionate, and always there. Or at least that's how I saw him in the beginning. However, over time, something inside me began to change. What started as a slight concern turned into an unbearable obsession. I could no longer shake the idea that Henrique might be cheating on me. This suspicion, with no solid basis, began to infiltrate every aspect of my life. When Henrique received a message, my heart would race and anxiety would take over. When he went out without giving many details, my mind would conjure catastrophic scenarios. I started to imagine everything from innocent flirts to full-blown relationships with other women. My mind became a battleground where reasoning and paranoia fought a fierce war. Jealousy, which once seemed like a minor annoyance, was now a constant presence, a shadow that lingered over all my thoughts. I found myself rummaging through Henrique's clothes, searching for a different scent, a lipstick stain, any evidence of his infidelity. But whenever I found nothing, instead of feeling relieved, I only felt a deeper anxiety. It seemed impossible that he was innocent. It couldn't be. Nights were even worse. Lying next to him, I felt as though we were miles apart. When he touched me instead of comfort, I felt distrust. Did he touch another woman like this? Did he think of someone else while he was with me? These questions echoed in my mind until I couldn't bear them anymore. One night, after another day of anguish, I decided I couldn't go on living like this. I needed answers. My mind was so corrupted by jealousy that I could no longer think clearly. I searched online for ways to discover infidelity and came across references to a group of witches who promised to reveal the truth about any situation. They weren't on the first page of results, but in a dark forum where desperate people like me exchanged information about unorthodox methods to solve their problems. In my already affected state of mind, this seemed like the only solution. I was so consumed by the idea that Henrique was cheating that I didn't think twice before following the instructions on the forum. A phone number was mentioned, one that I should call. There was no name, no exact location, just a vague and ominous promise that they could help me. The call was short and strange. A raspy, whispered male voice answered, as if it were a secret. When I asked about the services, he only gave me an address and said to be there at dusk. No further explanations. On my way to the location, my heart pounded with a mix of fear and excitement. It was as if I was on the verge of discovering a truth that could change everything, for better or for worse. The address led me to a secluded neighborhood, a part of the city I had never visited before. The streets were narrow and poorly lit, as if time had forgotten that place. The few people who passed by seemed like shadows, indistinct figures that disappeared as quickly as they appeared. I began to question whether it was really a good idea, but the desire for answers pushed me forward. When I finally found the place, it was even more sinister than I had imagined. A small wooden door painted black, with a strange symbol carved above it. The symbol seemed to pulsate with its own energy, something I couldn't comprehend. It was as if it were alive, watching me, judging me. I hesitated for a moment, the fear intensifying, but the pain of living with uncertainty was greater than the terror I felt. I took a deep breath and, gathering all the courage I had left, pushed the door open and entered. The interior was dark and claustrophobic, the air heavy with the smell of incense mixed with something rotten and old. My nostrils instinctively shut, but I couldn't escape the feeling of decay. The wooden floor creaked beneath my feet, and each step seemed to resonate in a way that echoed in my soul, as if the space itself was aware of my presence. 3 figures were waiting for me, sitting around an old, solid wooden table. Their faces were partially obscured by shadows, but their eyes glowed with a malicious, intense, penetrating light. They had no names, at least none they revealed. Their attire was old-fashioned, as if belonging to an era the world had forgotten. One of them, with eyes as black as bottomless pits, asked in a low, dragged-out tone what I was seeking. My voice faltered as I tried to respond. The energy in that place seemed to drain any remaining strength I had. But, overcoming the weakness, I explained my situation, my suspicion, my fear. They exchanged glances as if they already knew what was coming, as if they had dealt with many others like me before. "We can help you," said the oldest, his voice like the whisper of dry leaves in the wind. There was something in his tone that made me shiver, a sense that he was offering more than I could understand. But the price is high, not in money but in something more precious. Blinded by jealousy and desperation, I agreed without a second thought. All that mattered was discovering the truth, no matter the cost. The promise of finally having certainty about Henrique's fidelity outweighed any fear or doubt. They performed a ritual, something I didn't understand and, in retrospect, wished I had never witnessed. There were no words, only gestures and symbols drawn in the air with bony fingers. Time seemed to distort, minutes stretching into hours, hours compressing into seconds. The environment around me spun, and I felt as if I were falling into a bottomless abyss. When I left, I felt different, but not in the way I had hoped. There was no relief, no peace, only a growing cold in my chest, as if something dark was taking root inside me. The first few days after the meeting were silent. I expected the witches to give me clear answers, visions, or signs confirming or denying Henrique's infidelity. But what I received was something much more insidious. I started to notice subtle changes around me. It wasn't immediate or easily perceptible, but a presence, a sense that something was out of place. It was as if reality itself was adjusting to a new truth, a truth I wasn't prepared to accept. The shadows in my apartment started to seem denser, more alive. They didn't behave like ordinary shadows, but seemed to move on their own, crawling along the walls and gliding across the floor. It was as if the shadows had their own consciousness, watching me, lurking with every movement I made. I tried to ignore them at first, attributing them to fatigue and stress, but it didn't take long for things to get worse. The lights in my house began to flicker for no apparent reason. At first, I thought it was an electrical issue, something that could be easily fixed. But when I called an electrician, he found nothing wrong. "Everything seems fine," he said, but I knew it wasn't. It couldn't be. There was something in those flickering lights that seemed deliberate, as if the shadows were trying to communicate something or scare me. The silence in my home, once a source of peace and comfort, began to feel oppressive. It was a silence so dense it seemed to muffle any sound, even my own thoughts. And then, the whispers began. At first, they were barely perceptible, like the distant sound of wind or rustling leaves. But gradually they became clearer, more defined. I could hear voices, disconnected words, as if someone was trying to talk to me from the other side of a very thick wall. Every time I tried to focus on the sounds, they would dissipate, leaving me with the unsettling feeling that I was being watched. Henrique noticed I was different. How could he not? I was changing before his eyes, and not in the way I wanted. He started asking if everything was okay, if there was something I wanted to share. But how could I tell him the truth? How could I explain that I was being haunted by shadows that seemed to have a life of their own, that I was hearing voices whispering terrible things? I couldn't articulate the true extent of my fear, so I began to withdraw, isolating myself even more. My mind started to fail. What were once mere suspicions began to transform into absolute certainties. I was convinced that Henrique was hiding something from me, that he was the reason the spirits were manifesting. My sleep became sporadic, interrupted by nightmares where Henrique repeatedly betrayed me. In my dreams, he laughed while cheating on me, and I screamed for help, but no one heard. And it was on one of those sleepless nights that I heard, for the first time, the clear voice of one of the spirits. "He doesn't love you," it whispered, its tone filled with malice and venom. "He never loved you." It was as if the spirit was planting these ideas in my mind, but by then, I could no longer distinguish reality from imagination. I began to believe these words were true, that the shadows were revealing a truth I didn't want to accept. The days dragged on, increasingly dark and desolate. With every passing hour, the spirits grew bolder. I saw their shapes in the reflections of windows, shadowy forms moving in ways that defied the laws of physics. The worst part was knowing they were watching me, analyzing every movement, every thought. I could feel their presence around me, a constant weight on my shoulders, a growing pressure that seemed to crush me. I tried to confront Henrique several times, but the words wouldn't come. Every time I tried, the shadow hiding in my room seemed to come closer, its whispers growing louder. I was losing control, and it was evident. Henrique was scared, but I could no longer trust him. How could I explain what was happening? How could I make him understand the constant terror I felt, the sense that I was being slowly consumed by darkness? Finally, one night when the weight of the shadows felt unbearable, I gathered all the courage I had left and decided to confront him directly. We were having dinner, but the food had no taste, and I felt a constant nausea. I looked at him, searching his face for any sign of betrayal, anything that would confirm my fears. I asked directly, bluntly, if he was cheating on me. Henrique looked surprised, even offended. He started to deny it, but before he could finish his sentence, I saw, clearly, one of the shadows moving behind him. It approached slowly like a predator about to pounce on its prey. I screamed, pushing my chair back, but he saw nothing. To him, it was as if I were losing my mind. "Clara, what's happening to you?" His voice was filled with concern, but also fear. He was beginning to distance himself from me. I could see it in his eyes. I wanted to explain, to tell him everything, but the words simply wouldn't come. How could I explain what I was seeing? How could I expect him to believe something so absurd? In the end, he stood up, saying that maybe we needed some time apart. When he left, I was left alone in the apartment, feeling the cold intensify. The shadows became clearer, more present, as if they had been waiting for this moment. It was then that one of them finally spoke, with a voice that seemed to echo inside my own mind. "You always knew, Clara. He was never the problem. We are part of you. We are the broken pieces you never fixed." The voice continued, revealing secrets I had buried long ago. Each shadow was a part of me, each spirit a manifestation of my traumas, fears, and insecurities. The truth was that Henrique had never betrayed me. All the pain, all the paranoia had been created by me, fueled by my inability to trust, intensified by the witches who had only brought to the surface what I already carried inside. I sat on the floor, my hands trembling, as the reality of what I had done unfolded before me. How could I have been so blind? How could I have let my insecurities destroy something that was so good, so pure? Tears streamed down my face, but they brought no relief. I felt empty, broken, as if my entire being had been destroyed by my own hands. Henrique came back a few days later to collect his things. When he entered the apartment, everything was different. The shadows were still there, but not in the same way. They were now a part of me, a constant presence I knew would never leave. He tried to talk to me, to understand what had happened, but I no longer had the strength to explain. All I could do was watch as he gathered his things and walked out the door, taking with him the last hope I had for reconciliation. When he closed the door, the last spark of light within me extinguished. I was left alone in the apartment, haunted not only by the shadows, but by the weight of the truth I had brought to light. The shadows would not leave me. I knew that now. They were a part of me, and I could no longer escape them. Now the apartment is quieter than ever, but the silence brings no peace. The shadows are still here, a constant reminder of the price I paid for succumbing to jealousy and fear. I have tried to seek help, but some wounds are too deep to heal. I am merely surviving, one day at a time, while the shadows remind me that, in the end, my greatest enemy was myself. I know I can't go on like this, but I also don't know how to move forward. Depression is a deep hole, and I feel like I'm sinking further, unable to grasp onto anything. Sometimes the shadows speak to me, telling me it's all my fault, that I'll never be able to overcome what happened. I want to believe there's a way out, but every time I try to rise, the shadows pull me back down. I know that deep down the shadows aren't real. They are just manifestations of my own fears and insecurities, but knowing this doesn't make them any less terrifying. Every day is a battle, a constant struggle to maintain my sanity while the shadows try to drag me into darkness. If you're listening to my story, remember, there are things within us that are better left undisturbed. I am living proof that sometimes the demons we fear most are the ones we create ourselves. I don't know if I'll ever be able to overcome what has happened, but for now, all I can do is keep fighting. Even if the fight seems impossible, even if I feel like I'm losing, I need to keep going, because the alternative is to let the shadows win, and that is something I cannot allow.